Very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Nitika Garg, heading Research and Policy Function at OPPI. At the outset, I would like to thank you for attending today's knowledge session. Ahead of our discussions on stakeholder partnerships for rare disease in India, enhancing patient access, which is today's topic, I would like to express the intent behind this session. As we all are aware that Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has released the national policy for rare diseases in 2021, and we welcome and support the Government of India as well as policymakers for taking a step in the right direction. The virtual session along with key government stakeholders will ensure efforts continue for the benefit of the rare disease community. We all know that the rare disease space is complex and at a nascent stage which needs a sustainable efforts. This webinar is an attempt to bring all the key stakeholders on one table and discuss challenges and sustainable solutions to ensure that there is a roadmap for implementation of policy and continuous improvement is done to amend the policy conducive to all the stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem, which eventually would benefit the patients. We at OPPI have had several discussions and explored solutions to enhance and also enable access to overcome rare disease challenges in the country. And some of which are like really having data generation, definition of rare disease, access to available treatments for rare disease, and how do we build capacity for screening and diagnosis of rare disease with high incidence and prevalence rate. With this background, I would like to hand it over to KG Ananth Krishnan, who is the Director General at OPPI, and he will be setting the context for today's session. Over to you, KG.
Thanks, Nitika. Good afternoon. I think it's a great privilege right at the outset to express my gratitude to today's keynote speakers and panelists. We are grateful to Srimati Roli Singh, Additional Secretary from Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, who has kindly consented to be here with us and share her thoughts. And also to Dr. Vijay Chandru, the founder and chairman of Strand Life Sciences. And also like to take this opportunity to thank the esteemed panel members, Dr. Madhulika Kabra, Dr. Swasti Charan, Dr. Prasanna Kumar, Dr. Ratna Devi, Mr. Simpson, Dr. Sanish Davis, and also Ms. Vani Manja, who is going to be the moderator for the panel discussion that we are going to have today. So right at the outset, thanks for accepting the invitation and being a part of today's session. As Nitika mentioned, OPPI has been playing a key role in terms of consultation with several stakeholders while the draft policy was being created. And we are very glad that today we have a national policy for rare diseases, which is a step towards building a supportive landscape for managing the research and formulating measures to manage rare diseases, while at the same time aiming to strike a balance between access to the treatment and also sustainability of the healthcare system. I think this will come in this debate and discussion. Hopefully in the panel will come up quite a few times. How do we manage access as well as sustainability? As you are all aware and you're experts in this, the field of rare diseases is pretty complex and it's constantly changing. As new conditions are being identified and reported in the medical literature, apart from the current few rare diseases where significant progress has been made, the field is still at a nascent stage. And that is the reason we believe that the fact that today we have a national policy for rare disease is a step in the right direction. I also mentioned earlier enhancing access while addressing the challenges particularly in terms of sustainability of the healthcare system. Some of the suggestions which we believe will get addressed during this webinar today are the following. Number one, I think as a country, we need to have a very robust data generation and patient registry, which today probably is again at a very, very nascent stage. Because disease-based specific registries are needed to promote and support broad research initiatives that will help in characterizing the disease phenotypes, fostering, understanding of disease pathology, and also informing the disease progression, which is very critical and important. The second aspect is R&D and public awareness. We believe that a very dedicated corpus for research, communication and awareness building of rare disease will need to be made so that R&D and drug development will really progress in our country. While pilot projects can be implemented at the centers of excellence, which are doing extremely well, it will lead to improved diagnosis capabilities, medical awareness of the rare disease. But how do we try and create more centers of excellence across the length and breadth of the country is something that we need to really ponder upon. The third aspect is ensure multi-stakeholder partnership, because in any disease condition, no one stakeholder can really achieve anything. It has to be a collaborative effort between government, private groups, NGOs, academia, all coming together, providing the expertise, equipments, medicines, what have you, so that we are able to make an impactful, move. And then, of course, one of the other challenges that we have is a clear definition of rare disease. One of the suggestions that we have given to the government is that can we align orphan drug disease and rare disease definition to be aligned so that it may at least create or eliminate some of the ambiguities that are there currently. And then there must be a sustainable funding mechanism, because most of the rare disease, it's a high cost treatment. How do we try and develop a mechanism? Is there a way that we can develop a collaborative co-pay model between central and state government? Can we have both government and private sector participating together? Is there something that can be done in medical insurance segment? These are just thoughts which can be deliberated upon. And then access to diagnostics and screening in every state. Because if we need to address this particular challenge in a very comprehensive manner, these are few areas that we need to really look at it. So this webinar is our attempt to have a multi-stakeholder engagement and the dialogue for rare disease in India through an OPPA platform in the best interest of the patients, because in whatever that we do, we need to put the patient at the center and ensure that the benefit is passed on to the patients. So without much further ado, I would like to request Ms. Roli Singh, Additional Secretary, Ministry Health and Family Welfare, to address us, and the gathering. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ms. Roli Singh.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for this slightly delayed joining, because there was another meeting with the Niti Aayog that was going on, and there were two different platforms. That was WebEx. This is Meet, and we are juggling platforms, virtual platforms here. Can I quickly have an introduction to the people who are attending this, so that I know exactly who I'm speaking to, if that is not going to take too much time?
Sure, madam. As I said, first of all, we are very honored to have you with us, in this session. The other members who are there in the panel and the discussions are, we have Dr. Vijay Chandru. He's a founder and chairman of Stand Life Sciences, having an extraordinary background on rare diseases. We also have in the panel members Dr. Madhulika Kabra, Dr. Swasti Charan. We have Dr. Prasanna Kumar, Dr. Ratna Devi, Mr. Simpson, and Dr. Sanish Davis, and Ms. Vani Manja. I'll give you just a background. Dr. Madhulika Kabra is from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Swasti Charan is from the Government of India. Dr. Ratna JV represents IAPO. Mr. Simpson is the Managing Director of Roche Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Sanish Davis is from Medical Director from J&J, and Ms. Vani Manja, who is going to moderate this session, is the Managing Director from BI. And we also have Dr. Prasanna Kumar, who is again an authority in the area of rare diseases. That's just a quick, brief introduction, Ms. Roli Singh. Madam, can you hear us? There seems to be some technology hitch. Nitika, is there somebody who can check from the back?
Yeah, I have just requested Navneet to check in. So since we are live, I want to come in here and want to give you a quick introduction of Srimati Roli Singh. Mrs. Roli Singh, she is an IAS officer from Rajasthan Cadre, 1994. She was previously posted as Principal Secretary, Department of Personnel, Government of Rajasthan, has been given additional charge of director at an apex level, and also it's a training institution of the Rajasthan government. And we are very glad that Roli Singh has consented to be with us and give us a keynote for today. Before Roli joins in, I would request our moderator for today's session, Vani, to come in and to say a few words while Roli joins in. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitika, and thank you, KG. I think I will just build on what KG has already teed up and give a little bit of a sneak preview for what's to come in the panel so that we can jump right into the questions for the panelists in the time that we now have as Ms. Roli Singh joins. As KG said, this has been a discussion that has been going on for several years now in terms of how do we, across the multiple sets of stakeholders, across multiple disciplines, partner together closely and actively to enable and enhance access to diagnostic and therapeutic solutions for rare disease patients. The way the panel is set up, and Nitika, please interrupt me whenever Ms. Roli Singh joins, otherwise I'll just set up a little bit the panel and how we will frame the discussion later today. We've framed the discussion in 4 specific focus areas as you think about the journey of a rare disease patient. First of all, awareness, understanding, and management of rare diseases, which requires that we understand this large heterogeneous mix of diseases going beyond, depending on different estimates, 5,000 to 7,000 different diseases that form this group of rare diseases, all for small number of patients, each one, many of them. We'll talk a little bit about that on how to understand the disease better, how to generate awareness, how to gather data to be able to qualify, and importantly, how to even make sure we have a clear definition that we can use to help the patients. The second step then is to talk about funding mechanisms and access to diagnosis and treatment. There are several therapeutic solutions available, diagnostic solutions available, but the panelists will speak to the challenges with even leveraging what we have to make it accessible to patients. So how do we drive the access better? Third is also recognizing that many of these rare diseases still have significant unmet need in India and globally. And how do we make sure these innovative medicines are available to patients in India at par and at pace with other markets globally? And lastly, coming to the theme of the panel, we'll just spend some time discussing the importance of multidisciplinary stakeholder efforts and collaboration across NGOs, patient advocacy organizations included, government, policymakers, experts both in clinic and academia, and the healthcare industry broadly. Today, the pharmaceutical industry is represented, but broadly the healthcare industry as well. How do we all come together to make more progress on some of these key topics, if you will. Nitika, should I keep going or should I pause here for a little bit?
No, I think we can just take a pause, Vani, because Roli is trying to join in. I just wanted to check, do we start with a panel discussion and then take a break in case she is able to join in so we do not, we save on time?
Let's then continue if you're fine, and then give us a cue. We can pause and pick up because the conversation is quite dynamic, and I'm sure Ms. Roli Singh also will provide her input along the way. So KG has already introduced the panelists, so I'll not repeat that since it's been very well introduced. But as we go along, if the panelists want to add anything about their role quickly in 30 seconds, please feel free to do so. But from my side, a warm welcome to all the panelists. And I look forward to, during the course of the dialogue today, continuing what has been an ongoing discussion. And I'm confident that this will bring us one step closer towards significantly, and as KG you said earlier, sustainably enhancing access to therapeutic solutions for patients dealing with a wide diversity of rare diseases. Maybe starting with a little bit around the understanding, awareness, definition, and data related to rare diseases. As I said, by some estimates, there are more than 7,000 rare diseases globally. Very wide spectrum, heterogeneous spectrum with woefully inadequate diagnosis and treatment options. And maybe I'll pose this question to Prasanna and Ratna, Mr. Prasanna Kumar and Dr. Ratna. Prasanna and Ratna, the government of India has, as KG alluded to earlier, released a national policy for rare diseases in 2021, which is definitely a step in the right direction. But there is significant room for improvement, including better clarity on definition and classification of rare diseases, as also capabilities to diagnose, treat, and manage. So maybe Prasanna, if you could kick us off with talking a little bit about the opportunity to improve the clarity on definition of classification of rare diseases, please.
Okay. Thank you, Vani. First of all, I would like to thank OPPI team for organizing this meeting and giving me this opportunity to express my views. Like everyone, we patient group also welcome the National Policy for Rare Disease, which is the first recognition of rare diseases in a country like India. But however, still a long way to go. Till it actually benefits the patients and others ecosystem, so that holistically we take care of patients in an effective manner. So coming back to the definition. Definitely, definition is a must because it helps to decide and take action by various stakeholders in the rare disease ecosystem, which will help both in short term and long term. Globally, also we have seen that every country has its own definition, and also we have seen the outcome, better access to the patients, and many more facilities for the rare disease patients and for the industry to develop new drugs, etc. And also we can plan many solutions once we have a clarity that what we are doing and where do we fall in place. If you look at India, already Icmr has come up with a rare disease definition way back in 2017 itself as 1 in 2,500, which is based on the input and consultation of all genetic doctors and many stakeholders. Secondly, we also have recently an orphan drug policy which talks about less than 5 lakh patients is an orphan drug. So having these two, one, we need a better clarity among these two, what should we do? And both these are department under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. I think we need to come to a conclusion, what should we adopt? And why there is no definition mentioned in the policy itself. I think that makes a lot of things. And when it comes to patients, patients should know that how do I know my condition whether falls in a rare disease or not. That is the first thing. And whom should I approach? What are those government facilities, if at all there, whether I fall in this rare disease category or not. So, and in case if you are not fall in the PWD category, if you are not in the rare disease category, then where do I? That means again the question comes back to saying that we are still orphan in spite of having a policy. I think that is the main important for patients. And again, coming to healthcare professional also, they need to plan many things and guide the patient when they diagnosed with a genetic condition or rare disease. It is very difficult for them also to guide them in a sustainable manner on a long-term basis. And when it comes to industry, having the orphan drug policy is fine, which gives them incentives and also scope for improvement, scope for bringing out new therapies, which is again a hope for patients. But now, how do they decide which disease falls under rare disease or not? Again, industry is in blank, and the decision which can take in terms of developing a new therapies again will get delayed. As it is, it takes 8 to 10 years to develop a drug. Any year postponement is again a loss of many lives. And generally, in insurance companies, how do they decide? How do they plan? Because as it is, there are no insurance. But even if they have to start thinking about rare diseases, where do they start? Again, they are in dark. I think if you look at all these things, in my view, we need to have a definition, and we can start with an Icmr definition to start with. Later on, again, it can be revisited based on the experiences and more number of cases, or maybe when the patient registry is in place, we have more clarity. But better to start with one rare disease definition is what I feel. And as I told you, we must have a definition. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanna. Very clear and urgent call to action and a request to shed more clarity on the definition, because as you said, it touches the patient from the step one of understanding of the disease to diagnosis, treatment and management and access as well, and also enabling further innovation in the arena. Very clear. Thank you for that. We'll continue this discussion, but I see that Ms. Roli Singh is here. Ms. Roli Singh, we were filling the gap by starting the panel, but we said we'll pause when you join and pick it back up. So just for you to have the context, we started the discussion around what is needed to improve the definition of rare diseases, the understanding and awareness. And Mr. Prasanna just shared his view on the urgency of defining, at least, even if it's not a perfect definition, to start somewhere so we can improve with what we have and then continuing to improve that. And we'll continue with the panel with Dr. Ratna speaking a little bit about the skills and capabilities. But knowing that you might have another commitment, let's give it back to you. And then Dr. Ratna will pick it up with you when Ms. Roli Singh's finished.
No, actually, I think there is a technical glitch here. So I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I would like to thank OPPI for taking this initiative and bringing in some very key stakeholders in this conversation, which is very essential, because every stage the policy is still, I think, in a very nascent stage. And we're aware that the policy had come out initially a few years ago. It was withdrawn. Again, an experts group had to look at it because there were certain gaps that were felt from our felt that it was probably not complete, and there were some things that needed to be addressed further. So I think this policy that has come out in its reformed avatar is not something, again, which is cast in stone. So any suggestion and anything to improve it, the language, the legalese, the what exactly is it that we're trying to do here, the role of government, all that is definitely, I think, anything that can be improved should be improved. So we are open to that kind of a suggestion. But having said that, quickly, and I'm rushing because I don't know till how long I'm going to be available. So I just want to say one thing, that policy is one thing, praxis is another. And I'm glad that there are practitioners here. There are people from, I've seen Dr. Kabra is here from AIIMS. I think Mr. Prasanna is also must be a doctor who's dealing with these issues. So, and there are certain things which the policy wants to do is, I mean, it's enlisted certain centers of excellence. It says that there are funds available for upgrading, but that is probably not sufficient, because looking at the nature of the diseases itself, we know that it is a very long haul. First of all, to identify and at what stage should that identification start? Many a times it starts even in the, because these are things which are obviously genetic in nature and which have a seed which goes back even before the child is born. So how is it that we are going to map these deficiencies and these critical cases, having a proper repository and registry of such cases? And government's role cannot be denied in trying to fill the gap when it comes to curing and providing the right kind of treatment in collaboration with the experts, the R&D and the pharma and the the experts who are there. But we also need to keep in mind that right now the treatment itself is very prohibitive in nature. I mean, given the costs that are involved. And the government cannot get into the curative per se. We would rather get into something which is more preventive in nature, because that is more long term. We rather get into R&D, which is more long term. I mean, looking at the commitments, this is not, rare diseases are a very important area, but there are so many other important areas and so many other important issues when it comes to that the government has to be looking at. So we need to keep all those things in mind when we are proposing something. So it has to be sustainable, and I'm glad that term sustainable has been used quite, I would say effectively in your paper itself that I was reading, because it's all, I think, end of the day, it all boils down to that. What is it that we need to do, and how do we make it sustainable? Both from the identification of the problem point of view, and how to go about treating it, and how to ensure that the patient reaches or is given access to the care that is available. How do we make it more accessible in terms of the price point that we are looking at? I think that's where the whole challenge lies, because the R&D that is happening is very cutting edge, but it's happening elsewhere. How do we bring it in? How do we build India's capacities to do that kind of R&D here? And how do we also assist the pharma companies of India to foray into those spaces, which as of now are more or less, I think, in the hands of the foreign pharma. Though there is nothing wrong. Wherever R&D is happening, it's great, because it'll just expedite the learning curve, and it'll help us reach there faster. But how is it that we can make ourselves more self-reliant in this area? So I think, having said that, I would just like to say that the policy is there, but the policy is very much open to more suggestions and ideas. There are nuts and bolts issues in the current policy itself, which we are dealing with the COEs. We are already in touch with the centers of excellence on how to ensure that the money reaches them. There are also issues on how to operate the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi more effectively, because that itself has its own, what you call ecosystem. The RAN has its own way of, doing things. So we are looking at all those aspects, because as the policy exists today, what is it that we can improve at our end? We are looking at that. But the policy itself could have, be given a certain direction, which is hitherto not really, clear to us, because we are sitting too close to it. So I look forward to those kind of suggestions from the industry and from the practitioners. And I'm happy to note that Dr. Swasti is there. He has a very deep knowledge of this area in the ministry. So I look forward to the discussion, and I'm here. Please feel free now. Let's open the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roli. Glad the technical situation held until you were able to make some of your comments. Very helpful. And on behalf of the panel and also PPI, our thanks for you to share your openness to seeking or getting the collective multi-stakeholder input. And I hope that's a nice frame for this panel to know that this discussion will help take access to patients to the next level with all the constraints that you articulated. But I think the openness is clear and much appreciated. One of the topics you alluded to is also how to bring this into practice, how to bring the policy into practice, into operationalization. And one of the challenges that's come up multiple times is the skills, capabilities and infrastructure. The Center of Excellence being, of course, the right step in the right direction, but broadly how to address the skills to diagnose, treat and manage. And here, Dr. Ratna, if I could just call upon you to share your views, because I know you have some strong points of view here based on your own on-the-ground experience and perspectives.
Thank you, Vani, and thank you to OPPI for inviting me to this panel. So I will try and break this up into three sections: the skills, the capabilities, and the infrastructure to be able to diagnose, treat, and manage. As has been spoken since morning, rare diseases are extremely complex, very diverse, need a multidisciplinary team for most of the complex rare diseases. And also the acumen and the ability to, suspect that there is a rare disease in the first place. Now, whenever I talk of public health, I say that 70% of our population resides in the villages and 30% is in the cities, whereas our human resources for healthcare are just the reverse. So you have 70% of skilled workforce in the cities and 30% in the rural areas. And given the magnitude of rare diseases and the diversity of rare diseases, there would be a huge need for these skill sets across the spectrum of diseases to be, and the human resources to be able to actually suspect and then refer and then have a diagnosis to be able to actually treat or manage. And we currently do not have that. Also, our national policy for rare disease does not show a pathway for this kind of a referral mechanism. So probably that's one gap that we need to look at as to how right from, and we know that if you have to do a newborn screening, for example, we do have a national Umeed program, but most of our deliveries happen in villages through trained birth attendants or through Anganwadi, through ANMs. And if these people have to visually at least suspect, then they have to be taught how to understand that something is not right with the child, either because of delay in milestones or delay in other developmental characters, and then be able to refer to a center where there is somebody who actually suspects that there might be a rare disease and is able to then do the right kind of diagnostic procedures. Also, failure to thrive. We have seen several times that same families keep losing children, and there is failure to thrive, but nobody ever suspects that this could be because of a rare disease, and that is why children are dying one after the other. However, because that suspicion is not there, we are still very geared to infectious diseases. So because that suspicion is not there, there is no referral pathway that has been built into the system, and therefore, many times it's only after maybe the third or the fourth child with a lesser genetic, deformity or a change who actually survives is brought to a city and then is diagnosed, and then they arrive at the conclusion that they lost the earlier children because they had this rare genetic disorder. So I think some kind of awareness generation amongst the health workforce that rare diseases are a possibility and that you must look after them and have an algorithm maybe that can help them to do some kind of initial screening would be very, very helpful. In terms of capabilities, even if physicians are capable of treating, they do not have the infrastructure or the wherewithal, because sometimes there could be a pediatrician or a genetist or a OBGYN who is trained to understand what a rare disease is, but does not have the team to be able to treat. And therefore they are, sort of tied, because they can only offer whatever they have in their facilities or refer to a place where such kind of treatment is available. If the patient is unable to travel to the center of excellence, then usually the child does not receive the treatment that they should be receiving. So how do we build these multidisciplinary teams, or maybe some kind of a referral pathway where you can call upon these experts if there is somebody who is suspecting a rare disease, would be a beautiful way of building those capacities. In terms of infrastructure, we have these 8 centers, but those are woefully less for the kind of population that we have. So probably some kind of a partnership with the private sector institutions and hospitals where there are excellent resources already available, but sometimes unaffordable because patients cannot pay for those kind of treatments. How do we then, we've done it for surgeries, for bypass surgeries, for other surgeries. Can we do this for rare disease treatment as well? Partner with the private sector hospitals and institutions so that we have more centers of excellence than just the ones within the government, and we expand the basket of services that we offer to our rare disease patients. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Very clear, Dr. Ratna. Thank you for sharing your views, and I think nicely framed across skills, capabilities, and infrastructure. If I'm to connect that to another, let's say, infrastructure challenge, it's about the prevalence and incidence data of rare diseases in general. Yeah, and one of the things, Dr. Kavar, I'll come to you with this question, is that there has been much dialogue about the importance potentially of a rare disease patient registry. And while there have been some initial steps, there has not been enough traction. And coming back to the topic of collaboration that Dr. Ratna talked about, how can we work together collaboratively to expedite a patient registry of a very heterogeneous mix of diseases? And also, how can we leverage open data perhaps that might already be available to connect the dots and bring access with the multiple stakeholders involved? Please, Dr. Kabra.
It looks like PPI for in this discussion. Thank you. So, can you hear me?
Now we
can you hear me? Okay, right. So, yeah, this is a very important issue actually. When we are talking for prevalence, ideally you should have is the prevalence.
Dr.
Now, for generating community-based data.
Dr. Kabra, your line is really bad. Is it just me, or Nitika, can you confirm that we're having trouble hearing her? Yeah,
we are having.
Am I audible? Am I audible really or no?
Not very audible, Dr. Kabra. We hear you, but we don't understand.
My internet is working fine. Anything's working. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
I think if the video is
okay, right. So
off, maybe it would be better. The audio would be clearer, maybe.
I can turn off my video. I think it would be better. Yeah. Okay, I'll turn off my video. Okay. Please. So is it clearer now? Is it clear now? Is it clear now, Vani?
It's clearer. And if you could start from the top, please, because what you said was very
okay, right. Okay, right. So first, I want to thank OPPI for involving me in this particular discussion. And when we are talking about
Dr. Kabra, I'm really sorry.
And incidence data.
I'm really sorry, Dr. Kabra, the line is still not great. What I would suggest is I will just go to the next panelist.
Okay.
And why don't you jump out
and
come back?
Log off and log in again.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. I'll do that.
Have you pick up the question. While we wait for her to join back, Sanish, let me turn to you. In terms of maybe sharing a little bit, I've heard you talk passionately about opportunities to learn from other disease areas, especially the field of cancer. Maybe you could take a little bit of time sharing your views on how we could take these learnings, for example, from the National Cancer Grid in terms of data generation, leverage of data, harnessing the data to improve the understanding and definition.
Yeah, thank you, Vani. And at the outset, thank you to OPPI for the opportunity. I represent a group of organizations under the banner of Indian Society for Clinical Research, which includes both Indian as well as multinational companies who are doing research and development. So I represent both interests, and some of the thoughts that I want to express are more from the perspective of both these scenarios. So essentially the need for having data actually comes from three different requirements. So one is the national or rather the New Drugs and Clinical Trials Act, which actually came out in 2019, has a definition for orphan diseases. Now that is the definition by which the regulatory agency of the country actually decides whether a particular disease actually falls into orphan disease or whether it is something that requires a larger sample size or whether it requires a much greater study to be done, etc. So that's one of the first thing. The second thing is that when companies, individual researchers who are working in rare disease, who have products which come into the clinic, which means that these are essentially phase 1 to say phase 3 studies, actually come to the regulatory agency, and we have the subject expert committee, which is a group of, you could say like an advisory committee to the regulatory agency, which has clinicians on it. Their understanding of, you could say, definitions about rare disease, orphan disease, etc., are sometimes, you could say, caught between two ends. I mean, when I say caught between two ends, they have to cater to the NDCT rules, and they also have the Rare Disease Act, which is there, and also the ICMR guidelines or other stuff. Now, and On top of this, many of the members in the SEC would also say that according to us, or according to my personal understanding, this is a disease which does not fall into the criteria of rare disease or orphan disease. And then it comes back to the researcher to prove that the disease actually falls under a particular threshold. And obviously the conversation goes back and forth. And obviously, because there is no national data that is published, it kind of like falls into the situation where it is the SEC members, you could say, voice that is heard about that of the researcher or that of the company that brings in. So what that means is that this might be a global clinical trial, or this might be an Indian clinical study by an Indian company, but the sample size for that study becomes so huge that the project immediately becomes unviable, or the company cannot do these kind of studies in India. The third challenge is when companies who already have products which are approved elsewhere in the world, say, for example, in the major ICH regions, etc., they come to launch the drug in India and they apply for a new drug approval. Obviously, the same kind of challenges actually happen when sometimes the SEC requests the company to actually do a much larger phase 3 program. And it is very difficult to actually have this conversation again because there is no data to fall back on. And the other situation is that sometimes companies are actually slapped with a phase 4 study for an existing rare disease condition which has got approval outside of India. So these are probably the three main, you could say, challenges which actually leads both Indian R&D companies as well as multinational companies to strongly request either ICMR or other bodies to actually have data coming out. And it's not just data. I mean, a rare disease area requires a lot of natural history cohort studies. There needs to be infrastructure which is set up in this national, you could say, registry, so that anyone, any researcher who is actually bringing a product can actually take that product through that whole environment and get approvals. You don't have to go outside of India to do that. So the National Cancer Grid is something which all of us use as a poster boy or a poster child for how these things can work well. It is not that National Cancer Grid is a completely foolproof system, etc., like Dr. Pramesh himself sometimes reminds all of us. But there is a lot of, you could say, equity that has been built by the National Cancer Grid. And a lot of learnings from the National Cancer Grid can actually be used for the Rare Disease Registry in order to make sure that it is a much more collaborative approach. There is much greater involvement of both the private and public sector, and there is regular publication of data which enables everyone to take an informed decision. Thank you. Vani, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Thank you, Sanish. Yes, Dr. Kabra, Sanish nicely captured a little bit on some of the data challenges and how to take lessons from the National Cancer Grid, imperfect as it might be, but a lot of opportunities to learn. A great summary, Sanish. Thank you for sharing. And Dr. Kabra, let's try again to go back to a little bit around the opportunity to establish, reinitiate this patient registry for rare disease.
Okay, right. So I hope I'm audible now. Am I?
Yes.
Okay. So we were talking about generating prevalence and incidence data in the country. So if you want to have true prevalence, then you need to have community-based studies because you need to have a denominator. And as Ratna was mentioning earlier, that making a diagnosis in a peripheral center or other than in metro, not even all metro cities. So making a diagnosis may be a challenge. So for prevalence data, we really need to have large community-based studies to generate that kind of a data. And that would be identifying rare diseases, maybe by going from house to house or training the healthcare workers to pick up some warning signs and then maybe referral to specialists and identifying the condition. The other way to generate incidence data is by newborn screening. So again, newborn screening in our country, as was mentioned earlier, is not a national program as of now, but it is being done in some states like in Kerala. And as you mentioned in Ummeed program, we are working on newborn screening in the aspirational district also, and that from there we can generate some data on 5 disorders, some of which are rare actually. So, so this kind of newborn screening data is available in the country for rare inborn errors also, and from there some extrapolation for inborn errors, some of the small molecule diseases is there. But then to actually have incidence data, we again need to have nationwide newborn screening programs, which would include many of the rare diseases, not only small molecule IMs. So to have this, again, a program and then a lot of money would be required, because screening for these disorders is costly as of now. The third thing is the Icmr Registry, which is the ongoing registry. The aim of this registry was to generate some hospital-based data. Though again, as Vani said, not perfect, but then probably the decision was taken to initiate something so that we can actually see at least we will have families who are trying to seek care from some of these institutions, and there are about 22 institutions in the country which are both public and private, and they are contributing to this data. So it will not give us prevalence data, but it will give us some idea about the some hospital-based data about 6 groups of disorders for which Icmr Registry is presently functional, and these are the ones where either some kind of treatment is available or is in the pipeline. So begin with it was like that, and later on in the second phase the plan is to include more diseases. So and then the third way is, in many countries you may be aware that even patient groups contribute to the registries. So that again is an area where we have to be careful, because what kind of data we will get, and then how do we be very sure that the disease which is being described is correct or no. So there are issues in this, but needless to say that really need to generate data and have try to have some definition if possible, or a working definition, as Prasanna said, should probably be implemented. Now regarding the access to this data, so if I'll just begin with the Icmr Registry again. So when it was being planned, there was a discussion about who should have access to this data. So one was that obviously Icmr as the coordinating center will have access to this data. The individual centers will have access to their own data, and the nodal centers for specific disorders will be having access. But then the issue has been rightly pointed out by Sanish, is that suppose somebody, some pharma company or somebody who's working on a specific drug wants to have data. So then there's a provision, there is a committee in the same in the same project who looks after if there is a request from somebody that suppose we want to look at how many patients of a particular lysosomal storage disorders are there in this registry. We do not know the prevalence, but then in this registry. So an application can be made that will be reviewed by the group, and then if it seems that it is logical and it is sort of ethical and all that, and then that data could be provided. So, but again, making it public, I think as of now, in my opinion, I don't think we have reached the stage where we can make this data public. I think it should be made available to people who use it judiciously, and where actually it will be used for patient welfare. So this much from my side as of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tamba. That is clear. And I think what you're suggesting is a fair place to go. Let's start to say, how do we find applications to provide access to those who could use it to improve the innovation, improve the medicine that come to patients, which is fair. Maybe continuing on the theme of multidisciplinary partnerships to enhance the national rare disease policy implementation. Question to Dr. L. Swasticharan. Welcome, Dr. Swasticharan, and Dr. Ratna Devi. Dr. Swasticharan, let's start with you. The government has made steps, as Ms. Roli Singh said. There is openness to listen to feedback, etc. But there is much debate around the operationalization, the implementation of what is in place, so that with what we have, the underserved rare disease patients can get better access. The question for you is, you have a panel with many stakeholder groups represented, some are not, but how can this stakeholder group cross-functionally come together to support the government to help operationalize the policies and implementation on the ground, building on what some of the other panelists have already said?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion, and I echo the thoughts which has been already expressed by Madam Roli Singh, our Additional Secretary in the Ministry. In order to answer the questions, let me also try to inform you that we already have 8 identified Center of Excellences, which we have already shared in the previous panelist discussion. And we are trying to increase the number of Center of Excellences for providing treatment through an examination by a checklist or a kind of SOP to see whether quality care can be given by the newer COEs, which we are trying to establish or recognize. Having said that, we know that as per the policy, we have got 3 categories of diseases. Group 1, we are trying to extend our help through the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi funding. And Group 2, we are trying to do with the state government. The challenge comes with Group 3A and 3B that we have. Some of them we are trying to do it through the through schemes like the CGHS, but majority of it, as per the policy as of now, it goes to the portal, which needs to be funded by all of us, including each one of us present. The challenge we have with the portal is, despite the demand of, despite the requirements of about 125 crores of rupees for treating the patients who are registered here, the donation which has come is just about 1 lakh some thousands only, and we are having a problem, increasing that donation. Now I try to talk to many of the stakeholders, many of the patient support groups, as well as many people who try to come and meet us in the ministry. Then I ask them why it is not happening. If there are so many PSUs, if there are so many people who are trying to help the rare disease community, why can't they put that money into that portal, which is linked to the COEs, which is linked to the patients, and why it is not happening? They come and tell us that the requirements of the PSUs to donate are different. They have to follow certain paperwork which is not adequate in the portal. And we also talk to the COEs, and we tell the COEs that why can't you receive the donations from the PSUs if they are willing to. And once again, the PSUs are the COEs are also governed with their own mechanism from the administration that they can or cannot directly accept the donation for this treatment. So these are some of the challenges where, even though there are multiple partners who are interested in helping the cause, there are some hurdles which we need to cross together. So we in the ministry, under the leadership of Madam Roli Singh, are trying to reach out to both the PSUs as well as the COEs, try to find out that when we have funds available elsewhere, and when we have the needs of the patients to be supported, especially for those with 3A and 3B, let us try to find a mechanism through which we can do that. And funding is just one part. Funding the treatment is just one part. There are several other components, deliverables, which has been listed out in the National Rare Disease Policy. We are trying to have a mechanism in such a way that we have a kind of systematic strategic implementation plan for the deliverable listed out in the policy. That's what we are trying to do. The policy is a very ambitious policy, and it demands a lot of hard work from each one of us, and we are ready to do it with clear transparency for all. This is from my side as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swasti Charan. Look forward, I think we all look forward to continuing the dialogue on how to also scale. Right? Sustainability also requires scale, and you rightfully said you have to start somewhere, and starting with the 8 centers of excellence with specific diseases. And the question is, with all the challenges you articulated, how do we make sure we can sustain this, learn from it, and scale it as well, given the magnitude of the number of diseases in the mix? But your thoughts are very clear. Maybe taking learnings from cancer is another, in another instance here, Dr. Ratna, you are passionate about taking learnings from areas such as cancer to enable adequate allocation for rare diseases. Also because rare diseases sometimes can be a stepchild, if you will, to the funding that ends up being allocated to cancer. Would you mind elaborating that a little bit? Dr. Ratna, are you there?
I think she's not there.
It looks like technology
is requesting to be unmuted.
No, she has sent a request to unmute. Nitika, can you help? Yeah.
Akash, I'm not able to do from my end. Can you? Yeah.
Yeah, I can now. Thank you. Somehow I couldn't unmute myself, so thank you so much, and thank you for the question. So you were talking about lessons from the cancer grid, if I'm not mistaken, because I missed a little bit.
So Dr. Ratna, to repeat the question, two parts to it. One is what learnings can we take? Sanish earlier shared the learnings we can take from the National Cancer Network on data. And the question for you is what lessons can we take in terms of allocation of funding, making funding available for rare diseases, and also making sure rare diseases do get some time in the sun, because you've articulated in past conversation that a lot of the allocations do go towards cancer, which is important, but also for rare diseases. Please.
Okay, thank you. But we should also understand that cancer has been, I mean, the advocacy in cancer has been there for a very long time, and cancer has also had a face because of a lot of celebrities endorsing the condition, and also a lot of support from the World Health Organization in terms of its reports and other documents, and therefore it has been in the limelight or the spotlight, and has received the attention that rare diseases are still emerging now. Hopefully with the UN resolution, the rare diseases will also have its time in the spotlight, and there will be that kind of networks that are formed. So coming back to the cancer networks, so there has been a lot of work that has been done, not only from the government side to be able to support treatment for cancers, but also the patient groups who have all come together to be able to give the right information to people who are diagnosed to go to the right center so that they get the treatments that they deserve. So those networks haven't yet been built and need to be built so that it can happen. In terms of sustainable funding, the national policy already has a mechanism for some of the diseases under the rare disease umbrella that do not need maybe lifelong treatments. So one-time treatments are possible, organ transplants are possible. However, if you see the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi, under which this possibility is there, since Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi does not cater to just rare diseases, but is meant for all kinds of patients who need that kind of monetary support. And since some conditions like say the cancer or stroke or Parkinson's, etc., that are given one-time treatments have been there for a much longer time, the nodal officers are more tuned to be able to manage those conditions or give their recommendations. They still have not caught up with rare diseases, and even if patients were to know that there is a program in the country that can actually fund for their treatments, it is hard for them to reach these nodal centers for Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi, which are hospitals in capital cities of every state, and then to be able to find the person who actually understands their condition and is able to recommend. So I think it's work in progress. There needs to be a lot more that can be done so that whatever funding is already available is actually equitably distributed. Right now, a large portion of that goes to diseases that are already well understood. However, the allocation to rare diseases may not be as much as is desirable. So how can we change that so there is equitable distribution? Because there is no formula there saying, X amount will go for rare diseases and Y will go for other diseases. So how do we do that equitable distribution so that more children who are diagnosed with rare diseases actually benefit from the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi? Similarly, what I understood recently from conversations is that there are many rare diseases that can actually be, treated under the Ayushman Bharat cap of 5 lakhs as well. However, not many patients are aware of this. Neither the centers that cater to Ayushman Bharat programs are aware of this. How do we get that information to these people so that the patients and families are able to reach the Ayushman Bharat centers where they can be given the treatment that they deserve? Which leaves us with the last category, as Dr. Swasti mentioned, which is 3N, 3B, and the current mechanism of crowdfunding is not sustainable. Because it does not have a very clear methodology of collecting those funds. So what has happened so far is individuals have donated, and we know that though crowdfunding has worked, marvelously in many therapy areas, and we've seen miracles happening where millions of dollars were collected for a particular cause, it hasn't picked up that well in the context of our country. So how do we actually define, and there is no dearth of funding per se, there are a lot of willing institutions, only that pathway has to be defined, and probably it needs discussion across various stakeholders. So the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the CSR officials, etc., need to sit across the table and understand what is the methodology that can help the industry donate to this fund. And then how can that fund actually distribute to those 8 centers, or maybe in the future we have 80 centers. So how do we distribute to those 80 centers? And again, it needs a lot of dialogue and discussion, and somebody has to lead that dialogue and discussion. As of now, we do know that there have been a lot of initiatives to bring together people from the CSR as well as Ministry of Health to one platform to have discussions, but I think that frequency has to increase much more. And I truly believe that the patient groups can play a very definitive role in this dialogue. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ratna. Very clear. I'll not try to summarize that, but quickly move to the last theme, if you will, that we should cover today, which is around bringing innovation at par and at pace to patients in India as globally. I'll start with you, Sanish, because I understand you also had a commitment to go. Maybe if you could speak for 2 quick minutes on the efforts made by the industry so far on bringing innovative medicines to patients, and how can regulatory pathways be accelerated. You already started talking about it in the prior discussion around data. If you could just build on that very briefly before then I take the discussion to Simpson.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies to Simpson that I might be saying things which might be in your mind, but I'll try to be brief. Essentially, I guess the crux of the issue is the harmonization of all the rules and regulations that are there, right? Currently, I guess where we get challenged is that we go to the regulatory agency within their ambit of activities. They have a particular definition that they need to cater to. But then the wider the regulations, the R&D Act and others have a different definition. And then globally, there is another definition which is used by ICH countries to actually approve or disapprove drugs, or you could say slot drugs into rare disease, orphan disease, etc. So while I think it might be difficult for us to say that globally we can make a dent, but the thing is maybe harmonize it maybe in India so that everyone who actually works in the same area speaks in the same line, rather than have different definitions and different numbers that are touted. That might make a huge change in the way that it can be approached. Second is, of course, the consideration that sometimes it's not always possible to do all the studies in India for a rare disease condition. If it is already approved elsewhere in the world, then and there are no particular reason why a genetic or other reasons could be there, the agency and the government should be using the Reliance pathway for approvals, because that's something which is being extensively used. Use of multi-regional clinical trial data and the Reliance pathway for approval of you could say products based on you could say drug development which follows this pathway. So maybe I'll kind of like be brief and say that these might be the 2 things according to me which can make a huge difference in increasing access, increasing collaboration, and ensuring that patients' unmet medical needs are met.
Thank you, Sanish. And Simpson, over to you to elaborate a bit further on incentives to enable research-based companies to develop launch treatments in India and barriers to address.
Vani, Simpson again seems to have some technology hiccups. He's trying to log in.
Okay, so while we go with agility here, while we wait for Simpson to jump in, Dr. Kavra, I'll ask you to comment a little bit also around your views on incentivizing R&D broadly across the more biologics-based therapies, gene cell therapies, etc., which seems to be where I think a lot of advancements are happening, but require a lot of investments, as Ms. Roli earlier elaborated. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. So one aspect of R&D, if we are talking of pharmacological companies making these drugs in India, which is really required and may bring down the cost of these drugs, then a very important thing is the Orphan Drug Act, which has a lot of relaxations as compared to the usual drug trials which happen. So this has been discussed many times, and I think the ministry is thinking about that. But having said that, there have been relaxations from the DCGI when we are talking of drugs for rare diseases, and there have been actually relaxations in this particular area. There is a change in the rules regarding this, and DCGI is actually inviting drug companies who want to do trials within India. So even if the drugs have not been approved, and so I think this is one important thing for incentivizing the companies who want to come to India for their product or even doing some trials. So that is, I think, one thing, incentivization of the companies. I think the other thing is to promote research within the country, increasing the funding for therapeutic research in rare diseases. So I must say that in this area, there have been significant advances, and I'm sure you know that there are specific task forces now in ICMR and DBT, which are specifically actually looking at specific therapies, which are cell-based therapy, which are gene therapies, including CRISPR-Cas9, drug development, and so on and so forth. So that is actually happening, and there are many groups working in this area. So I think there's a need to bring the groups together. In fact, there was a discussion, ICMR has recently constituted a committee just for research in the area of rare diseases with focus on the therapeutics. So there, the plan is to bring people together. So the clinicians and the basic science people need to come together. This gap has to be bridged, because the scientist might have developed a technology which might be cross-cutting. It may not be specific for a particular drug or a particular disease. So bringing them together and try to develop drugs and even things like gene therapy is definitely a possibility. So there has been a lot of funding. And in fact, in the rare disease policy also, it has been mentioned that the funding agencies like ICMR, DBT, DST, everybody has to come together and fund research in the area of rare diseases. So I think this is one important step which we can bring. If we bring people together, then I think it will really take a leap and we will be able to make drugs within India. So this is being tried, and I'm sure it will be evident in near future that we are really working in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kabra. I think Simpson, I see, still not available. I know he would have spoken a little bit from the industry point of view around opportunities to incentivize further, including topics such as clinical studies waiver and removal of barriers such as import duty waiver for rare disease therapies and orphan drugs, as well as an important topic that KG and I have spoken at other forums as well around IPR protection. But we saved that for the next forum, and Ms. Roli think perhaps we could pick it up at a future time with you as well. But given there is 1 minute to go, we started with
representative. Ask something.
Please.
I just want to know, is there somebody from the Department of Pharma here? Did you invite from the Ministry of Pharma? No.
So today we don't have. KG, I'll let you speak if we had invited and the logistics didn't work out.
Yeah, no, madam, in this panel discussion, there is nobody from Department of Pharma in this particular forum.
Yeah. But Ms. Roli, take your point well. KG and several of us are actively also connecting with the Department of Pharma on some of these topics that clearly are connected topics to this and other areas as well. Point absolutely well taken. So Prasanna, I would like to, with maybe a minute to go, or we are over before we hand over to Mr. Chandru. We started with the patient representation. We'd like to end with that. If you could speak a little bit to any additional comments on the importance of cross-functional, cross-stakeholder efforts and the importance of advocacy in improving access to patients.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you.
Yes. See, cross-functional definitely it helps in many areas, because already we have seen patient group working with companies working with healthcare providers, patient group working with healthcare providers. What brings a lot of focus and personalized disease-specific advancement in the area. And many patient group also have funded and started the research and development. I think cross-functional this thing is very, very important. And also for the policymakers, involvement of PAG groups and multi-stakeholders helps shape the policy which is more effective, inclusive in nature. Many of the times we don't understand the problems of each other in cross-functional areas, and collaborations are very important. And when it comes to advocacy efforts, talking to prioritize and other things, obviously the parent, we always expect that treatment has to be given, and because our child is referred to us. When you look at it, more funding, support, and allocation for at least the treatable disease conditions should be the more priority, and all of us should work in that direction. Then awareness among all the government healthcare department is also very important for the rare disease, so that everybody is on the same page and works that. And more importantly, to sensitize the state government, to start implementing the rare disease policy, who's an important stakeholder. Because today we talk rare disease policy at only central government level. All focus is on the central government. But if we talk about group 2 diseases is left to the state government, I think still a lot of things need to be done there. And all stakeholders need to work together at the state government level, so that at least the group 2 diseases are addressed on priority basis at the local level, which don't require much of the resources. And most of these things can be accommodated in the existing policies and scheme itself. Like some of the conditions can be addressed within 5 lakh rupees a month per year, which already we have PMQI schemes and other things which need to be accommodated. Like this, we can list on things where stakeholders cross collaboration can come together and make the policy effective and implementation easier and faster.
Thank you, Prasanna. We are out of time, so I will wrap up very briefly to say thank you to all the panelists for your passionate points of view on a topic that's clearly close to your hearts, each of your hearts. It's been my privilege to moderate this session, and I'm sure, and thank you, Ms. Roli, for listening to the entire panel. Look forward to continuing to make progress on this important topic, and we'll go from progress to progress, I'm sure, in the next months and years with a cross-functional, cross-disciplinary collaboration amongst all the stakeholder groups. With that, and my sincere thanks, KG, I hand back the conversation to you.
Thank you very much. It's been a huge learning. I've got to know that there is such a repository of information and understanding, and there are understandings from various perspectives which we need to all bring in. And at the point about having more collaborative, giving a fillip to the collaboration efforts that had started for the funding. I mean, that point is very well taken, and I intend to do that at the earliest. We need to bring in people who are absolutely, who can be taken on board immediately when it comes to sharing their CSR funding and all, because I'm sure there is no lack of funds available out there. It's just a question of reaching out and, impressing upon them the urgency of doing so. But there are so many other areas where it is like, it's a huge, there is an NHM there are preventive programs. I mean, how do we weave it all in? That's where the effort should be, and the Ayushman Bharat piece needs to be fitted with part 2, which the state governments are supposed to be looking at. So I need to do a lot of talking within the ministry also. We need to be sitting together, and I was intending to do one very quickly. So I guess we need to be, everybody needs to get cracking if we are serious about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. KG, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Madam. I think it was nice that you participated in this program and listened to the wide perspective that has come in from academia, industry, patient group, the medical experts. And as you rightly said, I think we will continue to keep this conversation and dialogue going, because I think we can learn from each other. A lot of things can be learned from other disease area, as was explained as a cancer example, so that in rare disease also we are able to make an impact in a slow but definite sustained manner. And we are looking forward, as I said in my introductory note, that any one of these challenges can be solved only by a multidisciplinary stakeholder collaborative efforts. No single entity can do this. State government, the central government, the private sector, the NGOs, the doctor community, academicians, everybody has to come together so that we can make a difference. And the fact that the government has now a new national policy for rare disease is a good platform to start this and get moving forward. So that's what we are really looking forward to. Once again, our sincere thanks to you. And also to all the other panelists, Dr. Madhulika Kabra, Dr. Ratnadevi, Prasanna, and Dr. Swasti Charan for sharing your thoughts along with Sanish and Simpson and Pani. Thank you so much for moderating it. Very well. I hand it over back to Nitika to introduce, Dr. Vijay Chandru, and we are eagerly waiting to listen to Dr. Vijay, who has again an extraordinary experience in this particular space. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us in this program today. Really appreciate it. Nitika, over to you.
Thank you so much, KG. Thanks, Vani, for moderating it so well. Thanks, Roli, for bringing out the whole perspective from regulators' point of view. I take an opportunity to invite Dr. Vijay Chandru, who is the founder and chairman of Strand Life Sciences and commissioner at Lancet Citizens Commission. Dr. Vijay Chandru, PhD, MIT, 1982, is an academic entrepreneur recognized as a technology pioneer by the World Economic Forum. Dr. Vijay was the elected honorary president from 2009 to 2012 of the Association of Biotech-led Enterprise, ABLE, and he represented the Indian biotech industry. With that introduction, over to you, Dr. Chandru, to really sum it up and give your keynote. Thanks.
Thank you. So actually, I had prepared a few slides. Let me see if it works. I'll just try to bring them up. There we go. And can you see the slides?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah. So, yeah, I think most people identify me with Strand, of course, but I'm basically a professor at the Indian Institute of Science, and Strand, was a spin-off from the Indian Institute of Science. So I sit in the Biosystems Science and Engineering group, and now I also work with the AI and Robotics Tech Park, which DST has set up at the Indian Institute of Science. Strand, of course, as many of you know, was India's first genomics, clinical genomics company. So back in 2013, we had set up next-gen sequencing capabilities, which were recognized by the College of American Pathologists and ISO certified NABL and so on to do rare disease diagnosis. And, so I've been associated with the diagnosis side of rare diseases for almost a decade now in India. But, one of the challenges was always that we could diagnose, but then, the patients would ask, what can we do to help them? And, either curative or for maintenance and, just care. So I think for the last few years, at least, I've sort of changed directions and been looking more at the delivery of care for rare diseases as the primary focus. There are some collaborators I work with, including Chintan Vaishnav at the Niti Aayog, who heads the Atal Innovation Mission. I'm basically an innovator, so a lot of what I'll talk about is where the innovation edge is today for rare diseases. I've called this No Disease Orphan by 2030, just to play on the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has declared. I feel like the 18th goal should have been to somehow get the world to a situation by 2030 that no disease is orphaned, right? We are at least able to pay attention to the disease in whatever way we can. And with the spectacular advances in genomics and technologies associated with genomics, I think lots of things are possible, and that's what I'd like to leave you today with, the hope that the innovations are just around the corner to create affordable and accessible therapeutics, right? We've been working with patients for a long time. Of course, during the pandemic, it became difficult. So this center chat, has been interacting with, physicians like Alok Srivastav, who's developing gene therapy for hematological disorders at CMC Vellore. Kiran Mazumdar has been a great, proponent for the rare diseases policies and work that we've been advising the Karnataka government with, and of course just interacting with patients and caregivers who sensitize us to what it means to be with a rare disease and how to take it forward. So this open platform for orphan diseases that we've developed is really for hematological disorders, and we are working closely with Alok is one of the people who helped set up this. It's a not-for-profit foundation which works in the hematological disorders. We run a helpline. There's a community outreach, counseling, and so forth that we've been working now for a couple of years very closely with a few hundred patients and their families. So, I think I don't need to talk about the policy. I think already a lot has been said. I just want to point out how, in some sense, we have a John Crowley of India, right? I mean, there's actually a group of parents, and headed by Ravdeep Singh, who for their boys who have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, have actually tried to set up R&D themselves and get the medicines ready, and with the help from Icmr, and I think Dr. Madhulika Kabra and several of us appeared before DCGI to allow some clinical trials to get started, and they have actually developed an antisense oligotherapy, which has helped Ravdeep's son and several others now with medicine that has at least stopped the degeneration. And this boy Karan went on to be the head boy of Delhi Public School. He's now in college. He's doing biotechnology, and he wants to cure other diseases. So it's phenomenal to see something like this happening and inspiring, and they are actually set up now a GMP to make medicines, and now will be launching trials for about 100+ patients, and I think BIRAC and government of Karnataka have come forward to fund the trials, and so it was because of the pandemic we couldn't move forward, but Dr. Meenakshi Bhatt and others are going to be the PIs who will take the trials forward. So a great success story which can be repeated, I think, if we publicize it and talk about it, because I think these are the stories. This is how orphan drugs have been developed anywhere in the world. In the West, it's been because of families that have come forward and made it happen, right? I think the future of genomic medicines is what is most exciting. I guess the antisense oligotherapy, in some sense, came out of an siRNA methodology, but today this is just exploding. I think our capabilities of both being able to do genomic analysis and rapidly sort of develop therapies and either the oligonucleotide therapies that we talked about, or I mean gene therapies. It just looks like things will really get cheaper, faster, and better very soon. I think I was interacting with Dr. Roger Hajar at Mount Sinai, who was here in Bangalore just a few days back, along with, and he's one of the founders of Ring Therapeutics. And it's amazing, you don't really have to only work with adeno and lentiviral vectors. You could use viruses, which are actually ubiquitous and commensal in the human virome. So I think a lot of the immunogenicity and so on issues are much better handled by these viruses. So we're going to have, and these viruses are what you need for delivering the gene payload right into the cells of for gene therapy. So, and this company has been funded by Flagship Pioneering, the same company that funded Moderna, and I think they were sensed here a real breakthrough again with nucleic technologies. In Bangalore, with the government of Karnataka, we are trying hard now to set up a kind of a core facility for being able to play with all of these nucleic technologies, and so that we could also use it for things like pathogen genomics and surveillance, and for pandemic preparedness, but also for making vaccines and therapeutics rapidly using things like mRNA and many of these CRISPR-Cas techniques and so forth. So you'll hopefully be hearing some things about this fairly soon. I think it was mentioned that I'm a commissioner on the Lancet Commission for Reimagining India's Health System. Our primary focus in this commission, and I co-chair the technology workstream, and we are trying to get universal healthcare as a reality by 2030. And when you talk about universal healthcare, you of course really want to be completely inclusive. So patients with orphan diseases and rare diseases should of course be also looked after if we really claim that we are moving towards universal healthcare. And I think we're looking at reimagining the health system, where we move more towards a citizen-centric perspective of how to access care, and digital technologies, including the Icmr Bharat Digital Mission, are really going to make this much easier to pull off. I mean, we were talking about data and health and records and so on, with health IDs and digital lockers, and good data protection technologies in place. I think we will be in a much better situation to build registries, to maintain natural histories, and to have that portability of data across health systems. This is just something that I've been working with Professor Chintan Vaishnav, who is now at the Niti Aayog, where we are actually trying to build a dynamical systems model so that we can actually see how care, awareness, diagnosis, all of them work, from a health systems perspective. I think, we often think of healthcare only in silos, and so we're taking more of a systems engineering view towards understanding how to design policy. So it's too detailed to get into today, but I just wanted to also flash something that is really exciting, and how we might think about using artificial intelligence, and expert systems and decision support in a very, very creative way for rare diseases. And just by coincidence, this German group has been working towards this again with 2030 as the target date, and it's written up in the PMJ journal a couple of years ago. You can, if you do a search on Google, you'll find the paper Rare Diseases 2030 and how augmented artificial intelligence will support diagnosis and treatment of diseases in the future. So I do think we can reach no disease orphan by 2030, at least to be able to leverage technology, to be able to do screening, diagnosis, and be able to give some succor to the patients and their families and caregivers. This is the mission now, and I just want to bring up the fact that during the pandemic, our Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi actually called out for making the right to health a constitutional right. And I think he was, of course, speaking from the perspective of children who are his constituency. But, I really think that this would enable a lot of movement from policy to action if we actually took this up as a policy change, because it's not just having a rare disease policy that helps you. It has to be a right to that citizens have, and I think it's time to think about a constitutional right to health. And with that, I'll sign off, and thank you again to OPPI for inviting me, and very happy to have shared some thoughts with all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandru. Well put across. I will not take much time and straight away hand it over to our chair for Rare Disease Task Force, request Simpson to come in. He is the managing director of Roche and also as a part of our executive committee. Over to you, Simpson, to sum it up.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the esteemed panelists as well as the people who had spoken. I'm sorry, personally, from my side, there was a security patch and I had kind of got blocked off from this. Technology does play its tricks. So maybe I'll share my thoughts in a different forum, but I know that we are running short of time. I want to sincerely thank everyone for discussing this very important topic, because I think the only closing thoughts that I have is I think enough and more inputs have come in this forum for us to start working on it. I think the next step is going to be action more than anything else, because there's enough and more ideas, enough and more best practices. It's about how do we translate all the great thoughts that we had into something very tangible and actionable, so that we can look at outcomes and not activities, and eventually look at, as the fine speaker had mentioned, how do we make health a fundamental right for everyone? And it's just not about rare disease, it's about everything, but more so in rare disease because it's a huge unmet need and a massive gap there right now. So that's I kind of could conclude. And once again, thank you so much, and thank you, Vani, moderating brilliantly, and OPPI for creating an excellent forum as well. Thank you, everyone. Nitika, you're on mute.
Nitika, you're on mute.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simpson, and have a good evening to all of you, and wish you a good week ahead. Thank you so much. We are signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone. Thank you.